on Facebook. And I will be on Tuesdays from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to seeing you there.
Good morning. It's Tuesday morning. I'm Laurel Rutledge, the host of the Rutledge Perspective Radio Show on KCOH TV Radio, The Boost, here with the Jerry P. Beasley. Yeah. And I love Tuesdays. I'm so glad I'm coming in here today because I was telling Jerry, I said, I'm so irritated this morning. Technology, y'all. So my podcast is coming out on Wednesday. You will see the podcast and I'm getting the video, but I just, when you're trying to get something done and you got somewhere else to be, that's when technology decides to nut up. So I just had to get that out there so I could let it go. Get it out and let it go, right? So today we're going to be talking about code switching, finally, right? Because I've been talking about code switching for a while. So we're actually going to talk about it today. But before I get into that, just a couple of PSAs. Remember, there is availability again for PPP, for the payroll protection. Make sure you're going to reputable people to help you do that and figure out what makes sense for you and if it's something that you can do with your business. We are supposedly getting 1.3 million doses of vaccines in Texas, which, given that the whole state is opening up tomorrow, I guess that's a good thing. So all of y'all try to go get vaccinated. The CDC has said that if you are vaccinated and someone in your family is vaccinated, y'all can now, fully vaccinated, y'all can now hang out together without masks. And fully vaccinated means at least 2 weeks after the second vaccine or 2 weeks after the one dose if you're getting the Johnson & Johnson. So slowly and surely starting to get back. But, again, that's what they're saying now. We'll see how that goes. Spring break time is coming up. So just be careful. We don't want another surge because we don't want to have to lock down again. So don't be stupid, right? Just wear the dang mask. It is not killing anybody. It's not infringing on your rights. So all of that madness, I need y'all to stop. It is not infringing on anybody's rights. Wear a mask. Just wear a mask and back up off people. That's what you need to do. Okay. Let's talk about code switching. So the way this came up was a couple of things. So I've been talking about code switching for a while, and any person of color, especially Black women, have been code switching for a long time. We just didn't know what to call it. And the way this came up was a couple of things. One, when now VP Kamala Harris was debating former VP Mike Pence, there was this, good morning, Tisa. There was this whole conversation, there were memes that came out with her different facial expressions, right? And things about a comment about how all of the mental gymnastics she had to go to before she even uttered a word based on, what he was saying and speaking over and all that kind of stuff. And how you have to fix your face, you have to fix your words, you have to fix your tone, you have to fix your attitude, all these things you have to do just to be able to engage and be seen as reliable, as intelligent, as authoritative, all these kind of things, right? And then I read this article by a teacher that was talking about code switching. And the premise of her article was, we need to stop penalizing kids for code switching. And as I read it, what she was talking about is the use of colloquialisms and that kind of thing in their written language or their oral, right, communication. That we should stop penalizing them for that because it's just code switching, and we should acknowledge it, and we should be okay with it and all that kind of stuff. And the comments and the discussion that ensued was quite interesting and on broad spectrums, right? So on the one hand, there was an appreciation for the fact that there is language that is cultural, that is community related, experience related. And this is not just in communities of color. I mean, this is, worldwide. This is a worldwide issue. There are colloquialisms and there's language that's used, dialects and things that are used in communications when you are with people who have similar experiences, life experiences, similar circumstances, etc. And so there were some people who were saying, yeah, that makes sense. We shouldn't be penalizing people because this is the way they talk on a regular basis. It's kind of like the whole idea of people text so much that kids these days don't know how to spell most words because they just use acronyms for stuff, and how it's important to still be able to speak the English language and write and read the English language. And then there were other sides of the argument that said, wait a minute, that sounds real good, but people still need to be able to speak. Good morning. Good morning, Miss Edie. I hope I pronounced that right. Eaddy, Edie. There's still a need to be able to speak and write and communicate with a proper or appropriate English. And by just saying we're not going to penalize people, we're not going to grade them harder just because they're using colloquialisms, actually has the unintended consequences of preventing people from actually learning. Out of a supposed goodness of your heart for not penalizing somebody for their circumstances, you are actually putting them at a disadvantage by not requiring them to actually be able to perform in the same manner. So the arguments went from one end of the spectrum to the other. And for me, I was listening to this whole conversation and thinking about the argument, and you guys know how I feel about education. It is like the great equalizer, right? But then I started thinking, okay, well, yeah, this is an argument, a conversation, but code switching is not about language and what language you write. That's not what real code switching is. And I said, Laurel, now take your own advice before you go light people up about what real code switching is. Just go back, read this some more, do some more research, do some other things. And so I actually went up and looked up code switching. And if you look up the definition of code switching, the definition of code switching starts with a linguistic definition. And it talks about code switching from the standpoint of people who are bilingual, multilingual, switching back and forth between languages or dialects. That's called code switching. And we talk about, I think it was in World War II, the Cherokee language that was used as the code, right? And code switching between English and the Cherokee language. So the first definitions of code switching really are around a linguistic change, being able to change your actual language, the actual words you are using, depending on who you're talking to and your circumstances, etc. Way down in the number of definitions, because they'll have like 1, 2, 3 different definitions. The third definition, and not in every dictionary either, the third definition was this psychosocial definition of code switching, which talks about assimilation, fitting in, manipulating one's behavior, one's appearance, one's language in order to be accepted. That's the kind of code switching I'm talking about. Because that kind of code switching has some significant challenges attached to it, some significant impacts on emotions and psyche. And I'm not saying this as a licensed therapist, so I am not claiming to be a therapist. I'm saying this from personal experience. The constant code switching has an impact on one's energy, one's engagement, and one's own idea of who we are and how we are and what our value is if we're constantly having to code switch to make someone else comfortable. Because that's what code switching is about. Code switching is not about the person who's code switching. Code switching is about finding a way to connect with the other person who is uncomfortable with the natural of the person who's code switching. So that means we are constantly having to figure out how we maneuver ourselves and manipulate and turn ourselves into a pretzel to make other people comfortable. Now, we've also had this conversation that the honest truth is, especially in corporations, it's not about you. It's about the other people. It's about how comfortable they are with you. If you want to continue to grow and move and maneuver, it is about ensuring not about who you know, but who knows you, the sponsors that you have, the mentors that you have, and how people get comfortable with you, especially people who have a great number of biases, who have a very sheltered or narrow exposure to anyone other than folks that look like, act like, believe like them. It's about their comfort, right, wrong, or indifferent. It's about how comfortable they are with you if you are the other. And so code switching is that ability to change and manipulate how you show up in order to be heard and be seen in a way that is acceptable. Now, because it's Women's History Month, I wanted to talk about this on a few different levels. Because code switching does manifest itself in many, many different ways. So if you are a person of color, a woman of color, and especially a Black woman, that code switching is everything from how you dress, how you wear your hair, how you move your hands, what kind of facial expressions you have, because there is an attachment of anything that's other than complete calm to be mad Black woman syndrome. And people stop hearing what you're saying because they're seeing how you're feeling. And so that becomes truth to them. Not the words you're saying, not your position, none of that is heard. All that is heard is what they see, which is more emotion, more passion, more pointed conversation, etc., which in other people may be assertive or passionate, and in you is mad Black woman. However, if you are a woman, not a Black woman, and you are showing up differently, then that's when you get the whole aggressive versus assertive, right? And the way it really starts to manifest, I was having a conversation with another friend last night, and I've had this conversation with multiple people lately. And it can be kind of controversial, but I can be controversial, which is we have all this push on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which the hard part and the most valuable part is the inclusion part, not diversity. Diversity is just about numbers. You can go find a bunch of people that look a bunch of different ways and think a bunch of different ways and believe a bunch of different ways. You can do that. That's easy. That's just money. You just go find them, you hire them. That's easy. The hard part, the next hard part is equity. So treating them equitably. And the really difficult part is inclusion, because that means you care and are concerned and you believe that what that person brings to the table is of value. So the hard part is inclusion. So it's not the diversity piece of DE&I, it's the inclusion piece. And so when you look at this idea of code switching, and in particular thinking about Women's History Month, I grew up from a career perspective and professional perspective in industrial organizations. So in oil and gas, in chemicals, in automotive manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. I worked in other things. I worked in healthcare and everything as well. But even in those, there was a manufacturing component. And manufacturing environments, industrial environments, logistics environments tend to be heavily male dominated. And the more blue collar, right, wrong, or indifferent, the more blue collar, the more there is a potential for that to be kind of a raw situation, right? Not a lot of polish, not a lot of mincing of words, just raw and out there. And what you find over time is that women who have grown up in those organizations and women who have done well in those organizations often take on the behavior of their male counterparts. They code switch to be more, quote unquote, masculine in their leadership style, in their communication style, in their dress, in whatever, right? They tend to move towards the masculine to show that they are tough enough for the environment, that they can handle the environment, that they can handle the guy who's just really ugly to everybody, right? And that they won't be intimidated. They're not going to break down in tears. They're not going to do all this stuff. And so what you find is all these women who have taken on this persona that may or may not be authentic for them. In many cases, it is a part of how they can show up, but it is not how they want to show up. And it's not necessarily their natural state of being in terms of how they show up. But they have learned to switch that on in order to garner the level of appreciation or acknowledgement or visibility that they feel is necessary to get the work done that they want to get done, or to get the position that they want, et cetera, et cetera. They have code switched to be more masculine than feminine, right? Harder instead of softer, harsher instead of more compassionate. All of those kind of things that are associated with really strong masculine leaders is they can be really harsh, as opposed to women who can be a little bit more compassionate or seen as softer and unwilling to make hard decisions and all of that kind of madness, right? Well, the challenge with that is that if you start to take on that persona, then it's no longer about what you know. Again, it's about how you show up, because right, wrong, or indifferent, there is bias around how you're engaging with people and how you're showing up to people and how you are leading based on gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, if people happen to know that, if you've revealed that, all of that kind of stuff, right? And so that ability to understand when you are code switching and why you are code switching is really, really important. And it's not just corporate. I mean, this happens all the time. I cannot tell you the number of times growing up that I was told, "Oh, you talk white," whatever that means. Or you talk real proper. Or you just think you're better than everybody because, you talk that way. But here's the thing. There is such a thing as appropriate. And I can be just as loose with my language as anybody else, depending on who I'm around. But I also am very well aware that the biggest piece of communication is ensuring that your message gets across. And if I am showing up and I am dropping all kinds of crazy language and using all kinds of colloquialisms and all of that kind of craziness, depending on the actual situation, my message may get completely lost. Because the people to whom I'm trying to communicate either don't get it or they associate some kind of bias with it or what have you. And guess what? There is such a thing as grammar. There is such a thing as the English language. There is such a thing as the Spanish language, the German language. There is such a thing as appropriate language. And if you are savvy, then you use your ability to manipulate language to make a point and to communicate. A good friend of mine made me that t-shirt that says "classy, but I cuss a little." I'm gonna wear it in here one day. Because every once in a while, you might have to say that little word that's not necessarily the best word to say because people aren't paying attention. And you need to kind of shock people into paying attention. But it's just like if every time somebody talks to you, you're screaming and yelling and you're loud and they stop listening because all they're hearing is noise. They're hearing this, right? They're not hearing what you're saying. They're hearing noise. And so when we talk about code switching is deeper. Code switching is saying, I can't show up the way I am, who I am, the way I want to show up because that is unacceptable in the environment that I'm in. I have to be quiet. I have to be submissive. I have to check my words. I have to be really harsh. I have to get in here and mix it up with the guys because I'm in a plant. And I can't use nice words or dress nicely. I have to be one of the guys in order to be taken seriously. And that kind of code switching on a regular basis becomes something that is hard to overcome. And it makes it very difficult to maintain who you are. And you don't realize how deep that gets into your psyche until you're trying to just be you. And you don't know who you is. You don't know who you is because for so long you have tried to be who everybody else needs you to be. We saw this for those of you who watched the interview, Oprah's interview with Meghan and Harry, and she revealed that there were some folks who were saying, how dark is he going to be when he's born, little Archie? Well, most people weren't shocked by that at all. At all. And there's generational issues around that, right? The whole paper bag test, for those of you who don't know. If you don't know what that is, go look that up. The paper bag test. That just said how valuable you were, how smart you were, whether or not you were going to be able to work in the house or work in the field if you passed or didn't pass the paper bag test, right? We talk about people who were passing because there was privilege associated with passing. We talk about how, depending on where you go and who you are, if you are a woman in corporate America who can hold her own with the guys in a plant, That's great. But are they going to take you in front of the board of directors? Because the person they see is the person who is raw and real and down with the guys who are digging in muck every day. And if you are someone they take in front of the board and you're having to code switch all the time, who are you really? And how do you continue to show up authentically as who you are in every situation? Absolutely every situation. And sometimes that means you are telling people to back up. I'll give you an example. I tend to be, especially in corporate situations, I tend to be fairly even-keeled, just because you have to be. I can be passionate, I can be very clear, because it's not unkind to be clear. But I don't tend to kind of really go off the rails unless something's really, really crazy. And even then, I'm like, help me understand why we're doing that. Instead of saying, bless your heart, oh, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. I say, help me understand, because I'm not with you. I was in a meeting with the executives, and we were looking at instituting a new program. And it had some cultural attachments to it. Let's just put it that way, in terms of what had always been done. We've always done it this way. So we had an organization that wanted to do something different. We presented something different. And it was like, oh my God, people we can't do this to people. And what they really meant was, I'm too afraid to actually stand up and be a leader and tell people this is what we're going to do. That's what that really meant. But it came out as, oh, I don't know, people aren't going to like it. So I was standing in front of this group of executives. So one, I am the only Black female in the room. I am one of only 2 Black female executives in a global company of 17,000. And I'm sitting in front of these executives. There are 2 women in the room, total of 2 women in the room. And we're talking about this issue. I'm presenting this issue. And the minute I said the first sentence of the presentation, all of the questions. We can't do that. What do you mean by that? How can we do, this is not going to work. I mean, all of that. And every time I got ready to answer a question, somebody else would throw another question in. I literally could not get a sentence out. And finally, I had had enough. I had had enough. Now, these are grown people, y'all. And people who've been in this organization, some of them almost 30 years. And I finally just held up my hands and I said, I need y'all to shut the hell up. I am not going to continue to stand in front of you and try to present something that you said you wanted and have you continue to ask questions without even letting me answer them when you've already decided now that you don't want it because you're too afraid to bring it in front of people. So I'm going to stop this presentation and we're going to decide if this is what we really want, and then we can come back. I closed my laptop and I went and sat in my seat. The CEO said, we're going to take a break. And I meant it. I meant every word I said. But here's the thing. Because most of the time I was fairly even-keeled. I would have an opinion. I don't have any problem having an opinion and speaking my opinion. And most of the time, again, because there's a way that people can hear you. And if you're always yelling and screaming, nobody hears you. But because that's how I normally showed up, when I showed up that way, it was like, uh-oh, something's wrong. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. So we took a break. I went and got some water. I came back. Everybody's like, are you all right? Is everything all right? I'm like, I am just fine. But I meant every word I said. We are going to get real in this meeting and talk about, just because you guys have never seen it before, or because you're now afraid to say something, does not mean that we can't do these things that are different, that challenge the status quo, because we've got to move. We've got to change. And so we ended up doing the thing. We ended up doing it. But man, that's the kind of thing, though, that you have to address. And when you're constantly code switching, the challenge is when that comes out, you can't always control when and how it comes out, because you're in such a mode of manipulating yourself to fit everybody else's perspective of who you are, that not only does it shock them, sometimes it can shock you. Now, I wasn't shocked. I was just done. I was just done, right? But there have been other times when I'm like, ooh, I really didn't mean to say that way, right? That was a little harsh. Now, I meant it. I just didn't deliver it in a way that I meant to deliver it. Right. And so when we are constantly code switching, constantly not able to show up as our authentic selves, we actually lose who we are. And here's the thing. Nobody cares. That organization doesn't care that you are having to manipulate your brain and your psyche and your emotions on a minute by minute basis just to show up. They don't care. Individuals are concerned. People who are your sponsors, people who are your mentors, people who are great leaders are concerned and are aware. But that's not everybody. And so you are in charge of you. You get to decide how you show up, when you show up, where you show up, if you show up, and how you're going to be authentically you, get your voice heard in a way that communicates the message that you want to communicate. And you get to choose when you're ready to go. Because depending on the culture that you're in, your decision around how you code switch will have an impact on your tenure. And you know what? That's okay too, because you have a choice. And sometimes we need to just sit still because it is what it is. We need to just sit in that madness until we can make a plan. Because as I said, don't hurt you because you're mad at them. Sometimes you need to sit in the madness, but that does not mean you need to sit in the madness and be mistreated. That doesn't mean you need to sit in the madness and not say anything. Because the other side of that coin is I had a same meeting with this whole group of executives. And it was one of these where we were all going to give feedback to each other. And we were all going to talk about how we were going to be a better team and I hadn't said a word. This was an all-day meeting. I had not said a word. Not one single word. And I mean that. Not a huh, not a not a question, nothing. I had said zero the entire meeting, as had one of the other executives. So we get close to the end of the meeting. They go to the other executive and say, well, you haven't really said anything. What are you thinking? And he said whatever he had to say. And then they came to me. And by this time, I'm like packing up my stuff, right? I'm like standing up. My stuff is ready to go. And I said, we have spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to support each other, how we're going to hold each other accountable, how we are going to challenge the status quo, how we're going to be innovative and we're going to do something different. And we spent a lot of time talking about how the department that I run is the reason that everything is wrong. And how everyone in this room really wants to help my department. Help put the human back in human resources. Whatever that means. Mostly that means we just want the parties again, and I'm not a party planner. And so I said, everybody wants to help HR. And I said, and as I looked at everybody, there was a lot of stuff that was in my mind, and finally I said, and I just need all of you to know and hear me very clearly. And by this time, again, I'm talking really softly. I'm talking very deliberately. I had not said a word the entire meeting all day. We're now in hour number 8. And I said, I just need everyone to remember that not all help is helpful. And I packed everything up. We closed the meeting. And I said, and I will not be at dinner tonight. And I left. Went to my hotel. Phone was blowing up. Blowing up. Are you okay? Everybody wants to know if you're all right. How come we're not supporting you? What support do you need? Madness, right? But here's the thing. What I knew was all of the other drama that had been going on, because I'm not stupid, right? I knew what was going on. I knew the organization I was in. I knew the history of the organization. I knew the culture of the organization. I knew what they were actually willing to do and what they were not. I knew their level of tolerance for innovation. I knew their level of courage around actually getting stuff done or lack thereof. I knew all of that. But I also knew what the right things were to do. And what was not the right thing is for them to blame my department for everything and every ill of the organization, because number one, it didn't start with my department. It didn't start there. And everybody in that room was a leader. So how about you lead? How about you lead and we support? Because that's what we're really supposed to do. We're really supposed to be the support. We're not supposed to lead the entire organization, but I can do that too. If that's what you want me to do, then pay me to do that. Because I can do that. A lot of people may not like that if I'm leading the organization, but I can do it. And so that code switching, what I realized is when we sit in that constant code switching, we were constantly telling ourselves to speak different, act different, show up different, do your hair different, wear the right clothes, wear the wrong clothes, all of that kind of madness. What gets lost in that is our ability to really understand the issues that are at hand, how those issues impact the business and other people, and what we need to do to manage the issue, because it's not personal. It shows up and manifests as personal, but the issue is not personal. The engagement between people is personal. The communication between people is personal. The issue is not personal. That's the same thing when you talk about performance management. Real performance management talks about the behaviors, not the character of the person. That's why people have such a hard time with performance management, because they don't know how to talk about a behavior without talking about somebody personally and attacking their character or building up their character. And it's not about that. It's about how you show up. And that's why code switching is it can be so heavy, because it's how you show up. It's who people begin to believe you are because of how you show up. Because people have a really hard time, it's human nature, disconnecting character from behavior. And sometimes how you behave is absolutely indicative of your character. Absolutely. But I would challenge you as leaders that when you see behavior of someone who is in an other category, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, gender, what have you, if they're in an other category, I challenge you to practice the pause and understand whether that behavior is who they are or how they behave and how they show up. Most likely, it is how they show up based on everything else that's around them that is telling them that it is important for them to show up in that manner in order to be accepted or heard, or at least not hurt. It's that whole idea of whack-a-mole, right? You have those organizations where so many people are afraid to say anything because they keep their head down. If I keep my head down, then I won't get hurt. If I keep my head down, then I don't get laid off. If I keep my head down, then I don't get that project that is a career ender. If I keep my head down, then I can just keep my job. That's code switching, especially for people who are vocal, for people who are brilliant, who have great innovative ideas. But when you are saying you want innovation, and every time somebody brings something different, you whack them, you are teaching people to no longer be innovative. You're teaching people to no longer show up. You are teaching people that they have to turn into something different in order to be accepted. And it is exponentially more difficult for people of color, for people with a different racial or ethnic or cultural background. It is increasingly difficult to just be authentic. If you think about the Muslim community after 9/11, it did not matter if you truly were a practitioner of Islam. It didn't matter. If you, quote unquote, looked the part, there was a problem after 9/11. And so you had people code switching. You know, I was reading a book, and I cannot remember, Lord forgive me, I cannot remember the name of the book, but it was talking about this particular woman who happened to be, she practiced Islam, right? So she was Muslim, and in her family, they wore the hijab. And there was this big part of the book where she talked about this point in her life where she decided she no longer wanted to wear the hijab, and how big an issue that was in her family culturally, not only from a religious perspective, but just from a cultural and respect perspective. But because of where she'd gone to college and the job that she was doing and everything that had happened, she felt like she could no longer show up as who she was. She had to code switch. She had to show up differently. She had to dress differently. She had to act differently. She had to eat differently. I mean, think about that. Think about that. You can't bring food to work that smells of curry because people make a decision on you because of what you're bringing. I mean, it is insane the kind of manipulation we do to ourselves and expect others to do to fit in because somebody else is uncomfortable with us, because somebody else has our career in their hands. And this is what I talk about from a career perspective in terms of starting with a strategy first. Where exactly is it that you want to go? Because if things change on the way, you at least still know where your destination is. And then the journey can take whatever path it needs to take to get you to your ultimate destination. You don't automatically derail just because you have to take a side trip. But if you keep your eyes on the prize, if you have to stay where you are for a minute until you can go somewhere else, fine. If you have to leave and go do something you never expected, but it's still on your journey, fine. And if you are code switching in such a manner that you can't show up as you are at all, I would encourage you to examine that and make a decision. Because at the end of the day, the organization will let you keel over in that chair, roll you out, and put somebody else in your job. Maybe, if they don't just completely cut it out and double up somebody else. And they might send flowers to your funeral. Maybe. Because it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about the stakeholders and about profit. Right? It's that whole, and when we talk about code switching, that too. There used to be a time when we would talk about stakeholders and not shareholders. And there is a difference. Because employees, customers, leaders, everybody in the organization, everybody who touches the organization, vendors, are stakeholders in the success of the organization. But then it changed to shareholders. And we've seen what that has done not only culturally but economically. When what's most important is the happiness of the shareholder, the engagement of the stakeholder takes second seat. And when the stakeholder takes second seat, code switching becomes even more prevalent, because that second seat, you just want to at least hold on to the second seat until you're ready to change, right? So it is important that we understand, as we're in this Women's History Month and just coming off of Black History Month and just in general this whole push around DEI, because everybody's on the bandwagon now, right? Is the inclusion piece is the power piece. And that inclusion piece means that we find a way that people don't have to be in constant code switch in order to be seen as effective or smart or intelligent or innovative or contributing to the overall success of the organization. And if you are really exhausted, if you're tired, if you're feeling like things just aren't working, practice the pause. Take a minute to examine why. Y'all know that's my favorite question. Why? Why am I feeling this way? Why do I hate going to work every Monday? Why have I not slept on a Sunday for 5 years? Why? And then when you answer the question why, and do 5 whys, get to your root cause. When you answer the question why, then you can figure out what you're going to do about it. And if your answer to why is that you're constantly not being able to show up as who you are, constantly showing up as who you are, then you get to decide if that's okay with you. If it's okay, okay. But if it's not, you have an option and a choice to do something different. You have a choice.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is there ever a time when you need to code switch? And let's say if you're just starting out and you need this job, and this is their requirement, is there a time that you need to, and this is the rules of the company?
Right. So that's a lot different to me.
Okay.
Code switching is a lot different than assimilating.
Okay.
And what you're talking about, for me, is assimilation.
Okay.
Right? This is an organization where everybody is at work in their desk by 8 o'clock. This is an organization where, everybody wears jeans on Friday. This is an organization where people go out to lunch. This is an organization where when you are in a meeting, everybody defers to the most senior person in the meeting. This is an organization where, right? That whole idea of understanding where you're operating and behaving in a way that is consistent with the expectations of the organization, that is assimilation. Okay. Right? That is behavior that enables you to be a part of. Code switching goes deeper. Code switching says, okay, not only do they say you have to be here at 8 o'clock, but you really, what they really mean is you need to be here from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. And when you're here at 6 a.m., it is expected that you are showing up and you are having coffee with people and you are making sure you're working the rounds and you are engaging in a way that makes other people comfortable. And if I am someone who has, babies at home or elderly parents at home, or I am just not that morning person, and I'm having to now switch up and be Mary Sunshine at 6 a.m., that's code switching. Because I'm having to show up as not who I am in order for someone else to be comfortable. And that's not talking about like here. I was so irritated, right? I showed up because I love to do this. And I'm irritated because technology wasn't working. But I'm not having to pretend that everything is sunshine and roses and everything's...
But I said, don't come in there with that drama.
Right. but there's a difference in having to completely manipulate who you are as opposed to how you're behaving.
And when you say about the code switching, because I'm trying to make sure I'm getting this clarity, because one time I was offered a job at another radio station paying a whole lot of money. But the difference would be, you had a call log that a play log you have to play off of.
Right.
Couldn't open up with prayer. Right. You had to play this particular song at this particular hour. You had to be done at this particular time. Mm-hmm. To me, that would be code switching because I would have to morph into someone that they were looking for as opposed to using my personality.
Yes, what you're talking about is kind of a combination.
Okay.
So the fact that they said the way we operate our business is call log, no prayer, we are secular. That is kind of the cultural organization, right? Okay. If you're going to work here, these are the ways you have to operate. Mm-hmm. For you, because of who you are, operating in that way meant that you were not going to be able to show up authentically. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if somebody says, work here starts at 6 a.m., that's not necessarily changing who I am authentically. That just means I got to get up. But if they say, if you work here, that means you have got to hang out. You got to go to happy hour every day. You got to, okay, that's not me, right? That is another kind of cultural thing. I don't drink, right? Or I don't go to happy hours because there are things that happen at happy hours that make me very uncomfortable. I don't, hang out with people I don't know. I don't, whatever it is that are truly against a value system or a key behavior. That is code switching if you are feeling yourself having to do that kind of stuff in order to just be seen and heard and valued.
Gotcha.
That makes sense?
That makes sense.
Okay. So I just, when this came up, it kind of started with this whole education thing, right? And code switching and education. And the linguistic piece of showing up. And what I loved about listening to that, and with all of our international listeners, and I would love for you guys to chime in too, either now or send me a note later. Especially, and I talk about this on my podcast, having worked with a number of people in India and the different dialects in India, and they also have, because I got to tell you, it's not just the Black community that has a color barrier, right? And colorism is not. The Latin community does, Middle Eastern community does, the lighter the better, whatever. Brazil, right? In fact, just now, I think it was this year, late 2020, early 2021, there was this whole big thing about Brazilians who were darker in complexion actually owning their African heritage. I mean, it's stuff, right? There's there's deep stuff associated with race and color and ethnicity. But when I talk to people who are, as I've worked globally and talked to people who live in other countries, and there are different dialects, right? There are different languages. There are different ways that people show up. There are different expectations. That is also real around language. And even for those of you that aren't as globally minded, which is fine. I mean, there's no judgment there. As globally minded, think about even what people think about Texans. The heavier your accent is, the less intelligent you are perceived to be. Or you must be an oil person, or you must be a rancher. And let me tell you, the more exhausted I get, the heavier my accent gets.
You say y'all. I noticed that.
I say y'all a lot.
And I said, that's very country. But
yes, I say y'all a lot.
People from Houston say that.
Yes.
But you say it with a stronger drawl to me.
Because I'm a West Texan.
Okay.
I'm a West Texan, not an East Texan.
Gotcha.
And it's different, right? Because y'all, my y'all, is y'all. All y'all know what I'm talking about. Right?
It's a difference. 'Cause it's a different way we say y'all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is different. And so, but there is a perspective or a perception of your intellect or your capability associated with a dialect, associated with an accent, right? Those that have a East Coast accent will assume somebody is Boston, New York, or New Jersey, and make decisions on how they will interact with them or how the person will interact based on that accent. The same thing if you think about our whole, the area of the country, the Appalachians, right? That very, in some cases, what is considered more primitive dialect is automatically associated with lower intellect. And you cannot necessarily associate the two. That's what code switching is about. So if I grow up in West Texas, and there is a heavy drawl in West Texas. I mean, our dad used to get all upset with us because he'd say, you know, I need y'all to do something better. He said, because you can't say all right and night and cat and light. And we did. When we were little, that's what we talked like. That is how we talked. He said, I need y'all to fix that. And so most of the time when people meet me, when I was traveling a lot, and I would say, oh, I'm from Texas. They're like, really? Are you sure? I'm like, yeah, I know where I'm from. You don't sound like a Texan. Well, I've lived in a bunch of different places, number one. And number two, I had parents who were like, I need you to stop sounding so country. Right? I need you to fix that. And so, because there is a perception attached to that twang that can leave an interesting or lead to interesting conversations, right? And can immediately negate your intellect or negate your capabilities just because of what people hear. Now, hopefully, as we mature, we understand that you need to listen to what people say and don't just assume because they've got an accent they don't know anything. Right. Just like you cannot assume that because someone has English as a second language that they are somehow less intelligent. Quite frankly, if you got more than one language, you got something going on that a lot of people don't. Mm-hmm. So us ugly Americans that like to pretend that it's, you know, the only language in the world is English. And quite frankly, most of us don't speak that well. I'm just saying, we got to be real, right? That whole idea of code switching, not only linguistically, but culturally, is huge. And if you don't acknowledge and are unable to acknowledge that that's what you're doing, you're unable to really get back to who you are and who you want to be and decide if that's how you want to show up. Because it is a decision. And if you are having to constantly not be who you are, is that really where you want to spend your time? Because most of us who are not independently wealthy will spend most of our time working somewhere for somebody. Do we really want to spend that time not being able to be who we are? Not being able to show up how we want to show up. And that doesn't mean you have to be nasty and disrespectful and all that kind of stuff. That's not what I mean. But can you give your opinion? Can you speak the truth? Can you just say good morning to people when they walk in? You know who I'm talking to, who's listening right now. Can you just be courteous? Can you just be respectful? Simple. Simple. But code switching is when we are not who we truly are because where we're going tells us we can't be. Not if we want to be valued. Not if we want to be heard. And that's where it gets to be dangerous. Because that is making us invisible. That is making who we are invisible.
Laura, do you think that's why so many businesses started within this pandemic? Because as I look at my timeline, so many people I know have become entrepreneurs in this season. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's part of it?
I think there's a combination of a lot of things, right? I think part of it is people lost jobs, so they are just innovative, right? This, as I said, some of the highest number of millionaires were created during the Great Depression, right? People get innovative when you have no choice. Mm. So that was part of it. But I do think the other part of it is because this is such crazy times, and when times get crazy, people's behaviors get interesting. That there are people who just said, you know what? It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I mean, you see what happened in the recession of 2007. So many people lost jobs. And companies started treating people really badly because there was such high unemployment that the people that were there, they actually treated them like, well, you just better be glad you have a job. I can pile on this work. I can treat you any kind of way. I can maybe pay you, maybe not pay you. I can give you overtime. I can cut your overtime. I can do all this stuff to you because you are too afraid for me to leave your job, to cut your job. So I'm going to be able to mistreat you because I don't think you have a choice because you don't think you have a choice. But after that happened, that's when you saw a lot of movement. People who stayed in their organization because they felt like they didn't have a choice. They were just trying to keep their job. The minute the economy opened back up, they were looking for something else and they left. Because the organizations mistreated them. The organizations treated them as if they didn't matter and didn't have a choice. They call it golden handcuffs, right? When they pay you so much money that you feel like you can't leave because it's too much money to leave. They'll treat you any kind of way when they feel like you don't have a choice. And companies will tell you you don't have a choice. You always have a choice. You always have a choice. Now, it may be a good choice or a bad choice, but you always have a choice. And so if you're having to code switch all the time, you got a choice to make. Especially if it's getting so deep in your spirit that you don't even know who you are anymore. That you're not sleeping, that you're feeling bad, that you're gaining weight, that you're doing all this kind of stuff. Take it from somebody who had that happen, right? It is not worth your health or your sanity. It's just not worth it. Now, you got to do what you got to do. You can do what you want to do. I'm not telling anybody to just leave without a plan unless you're in danger. If you're in danger and you're being harassed and all that kind of stuff, you need to get out. But most people just need to make a plan. Because again, don't hurt you because you're mad at them. But don't feel like you can't even make a plan to leave because they told you you couldn't. Because they told you you'd never find a job. Because they told you nobody was hiring. Because they told you that your skills were just really specialized. And every time you look for a promotion, they're like, well, you still don't have this. You still don't have that. You really need this for us to do it. Don't believe all that. Don't believe all of that. Because there is someone who is looking for you and what you have. And that may or may not be where you are. And if they lose you, they lose you. That's on them. That's not on you. Mm-hmm. But you shouldn't have to turn yourself into a pretzel to be appreciated. Now, you do need to be aware. You do need to be aware of the culture that you're in. You need to be of the environment that you're in. It's like, at least years ago, it's not so much now. You didn't wear jeans to the theater or to the opera, right? You didn't. You dressed nicely. You dressed up. Not so much anymore, which I actually kind of miss. Dressing up for those kind of events, So there is such a thing as appropriate. There's such a thing as appropriate language. There's such a thing as appropriate dress. There's such a thing as decorum. There's such a thing as respect. There's such a thing as appropriate behavior. All that stuff still exists, even though we saw how it didn't over the last few years. That stuff really is important. It really does matter. It really does matter how you treat people and how you show up and how you talk to people. It does matter. It's around mutual respect, right? And common decency. That does matter. And even little things. I remember years ago, I'd have students show up and they're like, well, that's just selling out. And I should be able to show up and dress any way I want to dress and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, well, so one, you can. And two, there's always consequences to every behavior. So
that's the point I was trying to get you to make there when you just said that, because there are consequences. There are consequences. Because I hear people say, I'm just being real, but what if your being real is not really what is wanted or accepted?
Not only is not wanted or accepted, but you can be as real as you want to be. If nobody's paying attention or hearing you, it doesn't matter. Because again, if all you're doing is screaming and yelling and being contrary all the time, when you do have a real point, nobody's going to hear it. It's kind of like crying wolf. If you're mad all the time, when you're really mad, nobody's paying attention because you're always mad. You always have something contrary to say. Always. And there are many, many people like that. Here's the difference. That guy who's been working there for 30 years, who's always contrary, the feedback on him is going to be like, oh, he's always that way. If you are a person of color or a woman of color, it's going to be, oh, mad black woman. Oh, they just can't get it. Oh, they just don't have, I'm just telling you guys, I'm just being real. Right? And that begins kind of the code switching. So you still need to show up. You still need to have an opinion. You still need to have a thought. If you are in a meeting, you need to not sit silent. Now, that doesn't mean you just speak just to speak, because that also begins to undermine your credibility. But when you have something to say that's value added, you need to say it. You need to let people know that you are there. You need to contribute. You need to let people understand and have people understand that you have a brain, you have a perspective, and you can contribute. So if you're going to be in the room, be in the room. Don't just take up a seat to take up space. Take up seat to make an impact.
That's good. Say that again, Lou.
I said, don't just take up a seat to take space, or don't just take a seat to take up space. Take a seat to make an impact.
Because it's not making an impact in the break room. Because most people won't say anything in the boardroom. They'll get mad in the break room.
They'll get mad in the break room. They'll say it's the meetings after the meetings, right? And that's where a lot of information gets transferred in the meeting after the meeting. But you've got to be really savvy about that water cooler talk. Got to be really savvy, because what is the reason that the person at the water cooler is telling you what they're telling you? How do they know? And what is their reason for telling you? Are they just trying to get you to fight a battle that they're afraid to fight?
Come on.
Are they trying to get you to jump into something that they know is going to be a problem? And then they can say, well, I don't know. I can't believe you said that. Really? So don't be manipulated by madness. Right? Don't be naive. You've always got to listen to people with an eye towards what is their motivation for telling you what they're telling you. That's why I tell you, when you get a mentor is not somebody who needs to be your best friend. You're not looking for your best friend and mentor. You're looking for somebody who's going to tell you the truth and tell you the whole truth. Here's what happened. This is why it happened. Here's what the impact is. And if you do this, this is what you might need to plan for. That's a mentor. That's not the person at the water cooler is like, oh, I heard so-and-so and so-and-so. And, if they do this and they take this out, this is what it means to you. You probably should say something. Now, if you take that and just run with that, you deserve what you got. If you're smart, you will do a little bit more research. You will open your ears. You will ask some more questions, and you will pay attention, and you will make a decision as to if and when you jump into that madness. You can't take everybody's word for everything, because everybody doesn't have your best interest in mind. In fact, some people are intentionally trying to take you off your game because they want your seat. Just saying. So, that's kind of off the topic of code switching, but it kind of connects, right? It's real. So, if you are a leader and you got somebody who's being quiet, or you see behavior that kind of ebbs and flows, you probably got somebody who's code switching because they don't feel comfortable or they don't feel safe, right? If you see behavior that truly differentiates depending on who they are, you definitely have somebody who's code switching. And you need to do some deeper examination as to why people feel they have to do that in your organization. If you yourself are feeling disengaged, right? If you are feeling disconnected, if you are feeling lack of energy, or more importantly, if you're feeling kind of put upon, why? What is it that is creating that feeling for you? And what are you doing in your behavior that is taking you off kilter and getting you out of alignment? Because you could be code switching without even knowing it, because most of us do. Most of us do. And the longer you are in, especially corporate environments, the more likely you are to have it be a habit. And most people of color and many, many women code switch without even realizing it. I mean, it's just the way we learned how to navigate the world, is to maneuver ourselves so that we can fit into the space, the limited space that has been afforded to us. It's kind of like water, right? Water can fit in any kind of space because it just moves itself to fit in every crease and crevice. We are not water. Although many of us try to act like water. And when we try to act like water, that gets really painful. It gets really painful. And it makes it very hard for us to remember and to honor who we are, how amazing we are, how innovative and creative and intelligent we are. And it makes it very difficult for us to allow ourselves to demand respect and consideration. Because you're not asking for anything special. You're just asking to be treated with the respect you deserve. That's it. You're not asking to be given anything different than what is just genuine interaction. Just respect. Respect. I'm not asking you to agree with everything I say, but we are going to disagree respectfully. And that's not too much to ask. And so if you're constantly code switching, you are enabling people and not forcing people to address their own behaviors and manage their own behaviors. You are actually managing your behavior so they don't have to manage theirs. And that means they're not learning anything at all. And they're going to continue to exhibit that same behavior until you call it out to them and address it with them. All right? All right. So, code switching. Sometimes it's necessary, but when it becomes a way of life, it's something we need to examine and figure out how we can do something different so we can all show up as the amazing humans that we are. And with that, that is this week's show.
Wait, we need to shout out to your international.
Oh, yay!
On today. And I also want to tell you about, we talked about a garden.
Yes.
Last time, and a young lady sent me a video of her garden she started. So
awesome.
Where is yours?
I know. Well, actually, you know what? I looked up this weekend, so I've already got on order I found these really cool metal tubs, like stand-up gardens. Mm-hmm. So one is one big one, and then one's 3 tiers. So I've got them on order.
Okay. Well,
so I'm going to plant my cucumbers.
Okay, your cucumbers. The Texas cucumbers.
Right, my cucumbers.
We got Houston tuned in by the masses. We have Champaign, Illinois, Decanter, Austin, Kansas City, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth is in, New York is in, Chicago's in, St. Louis is in, Washington's in.
Love
Hamburg is in, Kuwait is in by the numbers. San Paulo is in, Berlin is in. And let's see, we've got Russia is in
awesome.
Today. Germany is in, UK is in, Philippines is in, Mexico, Brazil, Costa Rica, Kuwait, and Canada.
Awesome. Thank you guys for tuning in. I love it. I love it. I love it. Please send me a note if there's something else you want to talk about, something you believe. I would love to hear about code switching, especially for our international listeners. I'd love to hear how that translates where you are. And how you've had to do that and how you've had to show up. Thank you.
Your Facebook listeners.
Oh, yes.
Hanging in here. Miss Jackson is on here. Danielle Scott. We have Michelle Johnson and Annette Phillips from New York.
Yay, Annette. Thank you. Thank y'all so much for listening. And to my Facebook folks, Odessa's on here. Houston's on here. And I think I saw Dallas on here too. So thank you guys. I tell you what, I do this because of you. And because Jerry lets me every week. So thank y'all for tuning in. I will be back next week. Also, one more thing. I got approved to go live on LinkedIn. Woohoo! So I'm hoping, I just got to figure it out, to not only be going live on Facebook every Tuesday, but hopefully I'll also be going live with the radio show on LinkedIn. So you'll be able to see me both places, as well as KCOH and Alexa and TuneIn app and all that kind of stuff. All right. Thank y'all. We'll see you next week. Bye.